Hey everyone, wanted to make this video. We're going to try it again. Tried like 5 times to make this, but I keep getting interrupted or YouTube throws a shit fit over it being too long. I was going to originally do it with animation, make cute little characters talking to each other. Didn't work out. Couldn't get it to work right. So I'm just going to film myself. This is my first time showing my face on, I don't think you can really see it over the filter, but that's what I want. On YouTube. So, yeah, so let's talk about the Gospels and argue the lack of evidence for an historical Jesus. I know a lot of atheists and agnostics who, they don't believe in God, obviously. Um, and so but they still admit that there might have been a Jesus. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence. You think, free thinkers would be like, oh no, let's look at evidence. Let's see what there is to say about this issue. But there isn't. So let's look at it. I'm going to cover the Gospels. It gets a bit long if I cover the epistles as well. And then if I cover the historical, records, namely Tacitus and Josephus. So let's start with the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, the Bible. It's very interesting. This is a Gideon Bible. I stole it from a hotel. I don't want to give Bible makers money. I think it would be, I don't like what they would probably do with it. Rent-a-boy schemes, probably. I don't know. So, yes, let's start with Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke are the first two that I can really discredit, easily discredit, because they're plagiarisms. They plagiarize each other, and they plagiarize Mark, the gospel that's older than them, the first gospel. So, about 55% of Matthew and 42% of Luke, that's an absurd amount, are copies of Mark. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot to steal from, one book and then call it your own. That'd be like if I took, Christopher Hitchens' book and just, changed out his name of mine, and then added a couple things here and there, and then called it my book. It's kind of a silly thing to do. But beyond that, they steal from each other as well, because about 25% of Matthew and 23% of Luke, so almost a quarter each, they steal from each other without any corroboration with Mark. And then 20% of Matthew is its own book, and 35% of Luke is its own book. Must be nice to only have to write a third of a book and call it your own, or the fifth of a book if you're talking about Matthew. This is because Mark came first. You have Mark, and then you have a supposed document. It's called the Q document, which is just a list of Jesus' sayings, like parables that he said. And they combine the two. And you can see, if you get Koine Greek versions of the manuscripts and you put them side by side, which is how any skeptic should read any biblical material, rather than straight going down one through the next. You should always have 2 or 3 or 4 open and then read them parallel to each other. So you read, Luke chapter 1, and then you read Matthew chapter 1, and then, you wait until it catches up with what Mark's saying, and then you introduce Mark and John and yada yada. And that's how you really pick apart the inconsistencies. And the whole thing falls apart. So, I mean, Matthew and Luke, where they diverge from each other and from Mark, they disagree with each other. Things like the genealogy of Jesus, where Jesus was after he was born, why they were in Bethlehem, where they went after Jesus was born. Absurd differences. And I'll cover this all in a later video. Biblical inconsistencies, maybe. I'll call it. I don't know yet. But this is very long. We're already at almost 5 minutes, so I'm going to keep going. Matthew and Luke, done. Plagiarized. Just, it's garbage. They're not first-hand witnesses. Mark. Mark's the oldest. Mark's completed maybe around 90 in the Common Era. Probably a working edition circulating around the middle. It's maybe 2/3 to 3/4 the way through the first century. So sometime between maybe 60 and 75, there was a working edition circulating around. The problem with Mark is that it's certainly not written by a Palestinian. Mark's understanding of Palestinian geography and culture was just awful. He didn't understand it. He wasn't a Palestinian Jew. He was probably a Greek, which means he probably never met Jesus, which means his account was probably second or third hand, but I'll give my evidence for why I hypothesize that the author of Mark was a Greek. First of all, his understanding of geography was incorrect. He didn't live in Roman Palestine, who've known this stuff. So Jesus sails the Sea of Galilee, and he makes it to an area, you know the story, Mark 5:9, Legion, man beset with demons, 2 if you read Matthew. And he's throwing rocks at the boat, and it says, he's Legion, blah, 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 blah. Jesus casts the demons out into a herd of pigs, who then run down a slope into the ocean and drown themselves. Now, the original Koine Greek version of Mark places it at a place called Gerasenes. Gerasenes is a real place. Problem is, Gerasenes is about 30 miles from the Sea of Galilee. That's far. I run half marathons. That's 13.1 miles. That's a long distance. A full marathon is 26.2. This is 30 miles. This is further than a marathon. And as BibleAtlas.com puts it, quoting, "Here the slopes descend swiftly almost into the sea. The animals, once started on the downward run, could not avoid plunging into the depths." Now, if we assume that a decline that swift is something akin to 45 degrees, and this is basic geometry. I know math is it's no good for the yeks, but let's assume everyone knows basic shapes. Simple 45 degrees. It's nice and even. That's far. That would place Gerasenes 30 miles above sea level. That's the stratosphere. That's like 6 times the height of Mount Everest. That's huge. And such a place doesn't exist. There is no place like that. Gerasenes is not 30 miles above sea level. Now, Matthew, whoever wrote Matthew knew way more about Palestinian geography, but he was still had his shortcomings. He changed the place to Gadarene. And Gadarene is only about 5 miles from shore, which is slightly more likely. Still a bit of a run, especially considering Jesus doing this from shore. He cast the demons 5 miles out into some pigs, who then, from shore, then run into the ocean. Now, copyists who transcribed the whole thing into English, the King James Version, put it at Gergesa. And Gergesa is a region that formerly is thought to have formed the eastern part of the Sea of Galilee. Now, Mark also knew nothing about Palestinian traditions, especially marriage. In Mark 10:12, he says, "And a woman, if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery." Women couldn't commit adultery. This is a Gentile ruling. And Palestinian women can't commit adultery because they can't, not in that sense at least, not through this, because they can't divorce. Women, they weren't afforded the right to. So, it's like saying a man who has an abortion has committed murder. Men can't have an abortion. The point is moot. It doesn't make sense. And the Pharisees would have looked at it and been like, what? What are you talking about? This is already getting long, so I might have to cut it short. I'll cover the rest of Mark in a second part, as well as John. And maybe I'll fit in the epistles, too. I don't know. Until next time.